Imagine it. The year is 1805. The recent vice president had ended Alexander Hamilton in a duel. So it was clear that even though he came back to finish his vice president duties for that term, there was going to need to be a new vice president. When Thomas Jefferson ran for re-election, he chose George Clinton, mainly because he had already been treating George Clinton sort of like the vice president instead of his own vice president. He was going to George Clinton for all of his advice needs. Also, George Clinton happened to be, in Jefferson's eyes, too old to compete against the guy he really wanted to run after his second term ended. So, in his eyes and the eyes of the Democratic Republicans, this was the ideal pick. So while Jefferson came to Clinton a lot during his first term, the same can't be said for his second term. He really kept a distance once Clinton was officially his vice president. He had this belief, Jefferson did, that the bigger the vice president, the smaller the president. So he didn't want to be outshined, or he didn't want his role as president to be diminished by the vice president. So he wanted to keep the role as small and kind of invisible as possible. So he basically kept Clinton away with a 39.5-foot pole. When this last situation happened to the last VP, he threw himself into the Senate. Clinton wasn't really interested in doing that. He found the Senate more challenging than being a top guy for Jefferson. So this is not a role he excelled in. In fact, the senators at the time gave him a big thumbs down. They were not happy with him presiding over the Senate. But before the British came to town, this is what it would have looked like for George Clinton on his way to the Senate. During the freeze-out of Jefferson's second term with George Clinton as his vice president, George Clinton saw an opportunity to do something that Jefferson didn't think he could do, which is throw his hat in the ring to run for president against James Madison, who was Jefferson's pick. He was largely outnumbered by James Madison's supporters, who elected him to be vice president. So, as groundbreaking as it sounds for him to be the first person to serve under two presidents as vice president, it was mainly to keep him from being president. And it's not the first time that would happen. Another great example of being vice president to be kept from being president or being competition is Teddy Roosevelt, which we'll get to later. To be fair, George Clinton was still nominated for president because of his supporters. He was even considered at one point to be a candidate for the Federalist Party, his opposing party. And you can see here he ran as an independent Republican. But he, in the end, was obviously, James Madison had way more electoral votes. So ultimately, he was chosen to be president. While serving as VP for Madison, it was like his duty as vice president, probably because he was forced into the position to oppose everything Madison wanted. Some of his more highlighted moments is he kept the Secretary of State pick from being confirmed, and he also cast the tie-breaking vote that would keep the first bank of the U.S. from happening again. Little did he know, when he decided to run with Thomas Jefferson all those years ago as vice president, that would be the last thing he ever did. In his last year as vice president under James Madison, George Clinton passed away, making him the first vice president in office to pass away. Well, actually, he was the first vice president, period, to pass away. So, to sum up, George Clinton was the first vice president to die in office, the first vice president to die at all. He was the first vice president to serve under two different presidents, and he's the only person that you could have voted for in 6 different elections. It should be noted that Clinton's nephew decided to run against James Madison that autumn, but Madison was reelected. Tune in next time for the man who invented gerrymandering.